Good evening. We'll call the meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission to order on November 29th. This meeting is a hybrid meeting. It's being conducted in person here in the Great Hall in the Town Hall, as well as via a Zoom webinar, and can be viewed live on local government Channel 15 Comcast and Channel 47 Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page of the town website. If a Zoom attendee wishes to make a comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. In the in-person audience, if you wish to speak to the commission during public comment, which is on the agenda, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. So we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We have a fairly complete agenda tonight. We're going to be continuing the review of the charter items, which we started 3 weeks ago. We will also be discussing invitees to this commission for the two meetings we're having in January, on January 3rd and January 24th. We'll also be discussing the timeline for the commission's deliberations and work in the months ahead. And we're already more than a quarter of the way through the two-year operation, 6 months having transpired since the election. And we'll also discuss briefly the budget, which will be presented to the Select Board, the town meeting, for the fiscal year 2023, starting July 1st. Does anybody have any questions concerning the agenda? Hearing none, we will start. And we will then break at 8:30 for public comment. The first major item on the agenda is discussion of the charter points, and this is actually will be the third night of several that we've been doing this. And the first item in that list was the Finance Committee, but I'd like to ask the Commission if you'd be willing to move the number 2 item to the first item, the number 2 item being the master plan, because I know we have some participants in the audience and on Zoom with respect to the issue of the master plan. It's a major point in the charter, or whatever charter we have. So unless there's any objection, I would start with the discussion of the master plan, and then we will return to finish up our discussion of the Finance Committee, which we started at the last meeting. So the item on the agenda is the purpose of the master plan and its effect on zoning and permitting. And as part of the package of materials that were sent out, we included a PowerPoint presentation of putting together a master plan, which we're not going to show the PowerPoint because it was 23 slides, but if some of them were particularly good, and we can certainly comment on them when we get to the discussion. A copy of the PowerPoint is on the table if anybody wants to follow along in the audience. So we have as our outside experts, we have Lee Hartman on Zoom. Welcome, Lee. And we have Brigitte Kuhn here, is the Vice Chair of the Planning Board, and has also really studied the issue of master plan and how it might be implemented better here in Plymouth. So Brigitte, why don't we lead off with you, if you can kind of start the discussion, and then Lee jump in, and we will certainly be participating and asking questions.
Thank you, Chairman Abbott.
Brigitte, maybe you could, for purposes of just while you're speaking, remove it.
Sure.
That'd be a lot easier to
Yeah,
hear you.
if I'd known that, I would have put some lipstick on.
Is your
So-
mic on?
Pardon me?
Mic's on?
It is on. Maybe I can put it a little closer. I have a
Okay.
tendency to speak
Right.
softly. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioners, and thank you, Lee, for being here. Through the Chairman of the Planning Board, Malcolm McGregor, I am Birgitta Keene, Vice Chairman of the Planning Board. And I'm here with you today to answer any questions that you might have. I'm very happy to see that you have this creating a master plan from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council that you've hopefully had a chance to study. And with that, I really don't have anything prepared for you because you've, according to the agenda, have a very niche set of questions. But I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
Brigitte, do you have any general remarks before we jump in?
I think the first general remark that,
I was thinking maybe the first few slides here, if you could just kind of
Sure.
summarize.
sure, and
What is a master plan, how long is it in effect, and so forth?
so we, of course, have a master plan here in Plymouth. It was written to cover the years 2004 through 2024. It has been amended multiple times through this almost 20-year period. And it is a document that is advisory throughout the entire government of Plymouth. It has in it, as you see, well, let me just start. It's defined by state law. And I have here written the state law, which is, as you see from your PowerPoint, which is Title VII, Chapter 41, Section 81D. And this, as written in state law, in the Massachusetts general law, is specific. It's specific for the elements that must be in the master plan. It's specific for who actually is required to control and to be the board in charge of the master plan, which is the planning board. It's also specific that the master plan is, what can I say, is a document that is sourced through the town and through all the elements of the town. So in many respects, it's a time for the town to come together and define itself on the specific elements. But it also says that you can include in your master plan other items that are important in defining how your town is going to work, what it looks like, what the governance looks like. And I wanted to say, interestingly, you have on the agenda zoning as it relates to the master plan. The master plan makes no mention of zoning. It actually makes a mention that it is not zoning. But if you look at the defined elements, what you have to include in your master plan, and you can go to the state requirements on slide number 6 and follow along. Land use, housing, economic development, the natural and cultural resources, open space, services and facilities, circulation, which is transportation. It's another name for transportation. That is actually the definition of zoning. It just doesn't directly address something called zoning. It addresses how your town is put together so that you will address zoning. In other words, I think of it in my scientific background as a forcing function. It is going to force you as a town to look at zoning because you are required to look at all the elements that would go into zoning decisions. So that's my introduction, but again, I'm here to answer questions, and Lee is here to answer questions. Lee was present in the process before the 2004 plan was written, and we have, so we have an expert here with us on Zoom.
Okay. Brigitte, we'll certainly have some questions for you here in a second, but Lee, do you want to jump in at this point and kind of give us a Tell us where Plymouth is in the process?
Sure, that'd be great. Just a few things to go over. So Brigitte touched on a few things, but I'd like to just point out that a master plan really has two elements. And oftentimes we focus on the zoning, land use part, but there are two elements. The first is the public part of the chart, the public realm, I'll call it. And a master plan will look at public things such as infrastructure, open space, parks, traffic, roadways. But then there's the private realm that the master plan looks at, which is the land use regulations and zoning and other regulations that could be imposed by other boards and commissions. So the master plan is a place to start, and it starts by looking backwards and looking at what's happened over the past, probably usually a few decades, and then it looks forward and provides recommendations for how to move forward. And as Brigitte pointed out, the planning board is the holder of the master plan. State law says that they're the ones who adopt it. But in Plymouth, we've had a tradition going back to the 80s where we also bring that plan forward to town meeting. And we ask town meeting to also accept, not necessarily endorse every concept there, but to accept the process, recognize that there was a public process that the community went through, and accept that plan as something through town meeting. And in Plymouth, our master plan started in 1980, where we had what was called the Village Centers Plan. And I should point out, and I think the starting point for a master plan should be exactly what happened in 1980, which was a very intensive public outreach process. And so just a little bit about that plan, because we very much live by that master plan, and that 1980 plan set in motion many of the things that go on even still today. And I think it's still very effective concept that we adopted as a community in 1980. It established 5 village centers. Those 5 centers, Plymouth Center, North Plymouth, West Plymouth, Manamet, and Cedarville. Each one of those village centers is a commercial center for the community. And then it looked at those centers and said, there are 5 what we call village service areas that surround those villages. And so those are the areas where we have higher density development. R20, 20,000 half-acre lots, 25,000 square foot lots, and multifamily zoning. And then the recognition here is that in the town of Plymouth with 103 square miles, we can't provide services equally throughout the whole community. So, and again, very much as we do today, the bulk of the investments we have in the community, whether that's infrastructure, fire stations, libraries, the bulk of that investment should be done in those village centers where we have a higher density of population. Then there's this other area called the rural residential, which is the vast majority of the town. And as today, as it was in 1980, the recommendation is to discourage growth and minimize growth as best as possible in that rural area. So back in the 80s and early 90s, the zoning was 1 unit per, or 1 house per acre and a half, 60,000 square foot lots, which at the time was considered about as aggressive as you could get. Since then, we went through and changed that to 1 unit per 120,000 square feet, or almost 1 unit per every 3 acres. So again, I think the master plan speaks to trying to do the best you can to minimize growth. In Massachusetts, that 3-acre zoning is as aggressive as you can get. There's probably only one community that has a higher number. Trying to go higher than that is very difficult. So again, the master plan looks to discourage growth in those rural areas, and that's what our zoning does based on that 1980 plan. The plan also identified areas for economic development, and those were essentially the industrial park, the airport, and the area around, can't call it exit 5 anymore, exit 7, Long Pond Road. So that's how we've worked. And again, when you look at the infrastructure investments the community makes, it is made throughout the town, but the focus is in those village service areas. And as Brigitte pointed out, there are many components of the master plan. At least that's the way I look at it. The open space plan, which we update every 5 to 7 years. We've done a number of updates to village center plans, which are brought to town meeting for adoption. Our next one is to revisit Cedarville and update that one again. We have a affordable housing plan that, again, I would consider part of our master plan. So although we haven't done a major update of the entire plan, I think we're constantly looking at various components as the years go on and updating those from time to time. So again, I think when I look at when we start the next process, it has to be
a fairly intensive public outreach to ask the community what they think is most important, what they vision for the community. Is it commercial development? Is it open spaces? Is it a combination of those things? Which resources are most important to them? What are those things that are important? And from those public outreach sessions, the master plan would flow. I would say for me right now, on a couple of occasions, I've gone through the capital program and trying to seek funds for updating the master plan. And I think really the issue comes down to, for me, and it's a difficult one, is trying to get the funding necessary to do a plan. I think if we had that money today, if we had it 5 years ago, we would have done an update. We're talking, and depending on what the scope is and what the community wants to look at, $250,000 to $400,000 for a master plan update for a town as big and complex as Plymouth. I would just point out that 2 years ago, we did an update of just the fire department master plan for the stations, and that was $150,000 just to look at the fire department issues. So the biggest constraint to updating our master plan is really that funding and trying to get that funding. And the times that I've gone through capital, I'm competing against computers for students, fire trucks, public safety, roof and maintenance, critical maintenance repairs to public facilities. And the master plan just doesn't rank high enough in many cases to warrant that kind of funding through the process. I'm hopeful now that there's a lot of focus on needing to update the master plan, and that when we do go to town meeting for the funding, that we will have some broad-based support to revisit our 1980 and then our 2004 master plan and do an update of that. But again, I think funding's the biggest challenge. Once we know we have local funding, we can certainly look at, and especially now the state has made some planning grants available and funding available to help offset the cost. But without that local commitment to funds, it becomes a challenge. So again, I think it's long overdue to update the master plan, and really the issue comes down to how it competes against some of the other capital items with funding. Thanks.
Okay, Lee, thank you. We have questions for Lee. Lee, I'll ask you, start off with a couple of questions. So the master plan is supposed to be, last like 11 or 15 years. When did we last update this master plan?
The last major overhaul was 2004, so it's long overdue.
Right. Brigitte, yes?
Pull updates in sections of the master plan. It's been a fluid document. And if I could just read one sentence from...
Could you speak just a little bit louder?
Sure. If I could just read one sentence from Massachusetts general law regarding the master plan. It says, a city or town which has established master plan or study plan under Section 81A and applies for a state grant from the Commonwealth, which we do all the time, shall prepare and keep on file within such city or town an economic development supplement. And if you all remember a document which I think received some lukewarm reception, that is the RKG report. So that is a comprehensive report that follows the instructions from the state for a master plan, but it has allowed us to continue to apply for grants from the Commonwealth. So it shows you somewhat what the importance of the master plan is.
Okay. Comments, questions so far? Betsy?
Yes, thank you so much, Lee and Brigitte. I have two questions, and you can take them however you'd like. Page 9, slide 9, has emerging issues, and I'd like to have you speak to that. And secondly, I'd like to know if there's anything in the charter that you think could be updated or changed that would support the planning board or the planning department. Thank you.
Lee, if I may?
Is that a question to Lee?
Either one, it's okay with me.
Okay.
Yeah, so what you're asking, you want me to get closer? Okay. What you're asking then, Betsy, is do we believe that there are any emerging issues that we will look at? Is that correct?
No, I'd like to have you speak to the emerging issues. Emerging issues, are these what you plan to put in the next master plan? I'm not sure why there's a slide called emerging issues.
Yeah.
Is that emerging
So-
issues in Plymouth?
Yes.
Yes,
So in essence, there are the defined elements that are requirements. But the master plan doesn't only have to address the state-defined elements.
Right.
It can add its own elements that actually define its own town. So as far as emerging issues, when we get into the master planning process, it's going to be the citizens of Plymouth that are going to actually define the emergency issues for the planning board. That's the whole outsourcing effort with the town to create a master plan that is the residents' master plan. It doesn't belong to the planning board. We're just the process holders. It belongs to the town of Plymouth and its residents. I would anticipate that for this master plan, one of the biggest emerging issues is going to be climate change because it's not addressed. Let's say it is not addressed in a way in 2004 that we would address it today in 2021 moving forward. And the second part of your question?
And maybe Lee could also
Sure.
answer both questions. Are there parts of the charter that you think could be changed or updated that would better support the planning board and the planning department?
Lee?
Oh, so if that's for me,
Yeah.
I don't really feel so. I think over the years, the charter has been changed from time to time. And so I don't see an issue or any major issues with the framework that's in place now for the planning department or for the planning board itself. That's my only, the only thing I would love to see is an alternate planning board member that can vote on everything, not just special permits. That's the way the state law is written. I'm not sure if in the charter you could create one or two alternate planning board members that could also then participate in the absence like a zoning board member does. That would be a question for council. That would probably be the one thing that would be most important.
Okay, I see Wrestling, Brewster's hand is up. Wrestling.
Yes.
Good.
This is for Lee. Just a multiple part question. Are we following the master plan? What entity makes sure that we're following the master plan? And what process do we have if we're not following the master plan to get back to the master plan? Just kind of an all over, if we've got a master plan, it's all great, but if we're not following it and going by it, what entity is making sure that we're doing that?
Right. So the master plan is advisory only. So there's really no penalty or no failure for not doing things. And every master plan I've ever seen has some lofty recommendations that probably will never happen. It doesn't mean you don't recommend them. It's things you want to strive for. But I can tell you, and I often hear, and I kind of chuckle at it, how people say, oh, the plans just sit on the shelf and they never get used. But I can tell you, not just the planning department, the DPW, environmental affairs, the master plans that we have and the concepts that are in there are used every day when we look at how we invest our town money or the the land use decisions we make too. And again, I point to that village centers plan where we really say, let's minimize as best we can the residential development in the rural parts of town. And let's focus that growth and that development in a village. So we do live by those every day.
But no, it's
Follow-up question, Wrestling?
like you said, is seen that it just sits on the shelf, and it's good to know that it's overall advising on how we should deal with things.
I would also add, at one point, I was providing a recommendation to capital outlay, and on every article that they were looking to fund, I didn't say whether you should approve it or not. I would just point out what is consistent with the master plan and not. That turned out to be a pretty labor-intensive process and usually kind of chasing it at the last minute. But it is something that I think was well received, and again, maybe with the staffing resources, once we get ourselves settled as a community, we can start that again. And that was also a good way to use the master plan every day and make other groups aware of it.
And I know when we were creating the harbor plan, we got some advisors who had created one before, and they said it's really useful when you're going for grants or when you're doing things that, no, this isn't our harbor plan, and this is why we want to guide that and how we're trying to do that. So it's good to hear that, it's in use every day.
If I could, sitting on the planning board, there isn't a development or an agenda item that we hear from the public that is in one of our villages, one of the 5 villages, where the opinion of the village steering committee is presented to the planning board, and we will not move ahead on any decision until we have that opinion from the village steering committees. So that's a very active part of the master plan and continues to be updated. Village Center was just updated recently, and as Lee said, Cedarville will be updated again soon.
So, so as a commission, we'll be writing a provision about the master plan. And just looking at the provision that's currently in the charter, which says that the planning board, it's clearly your planning board's responsibility, shall develop and maintain a comprehensive master plan. And then it goes on to say that the planning board will report annually to the town meeting to inform the town meeting of all updates to the master plan, any implementation measures. So that's the administrative part of it. But then it goes on to say, and I think this was an important provision when it was put in, it says the planning board's recommendations on zoning bylaw amendments to the representative town meeting shall be consistent with the comprehensive master plan. So we were, the people who wrote that charter were trying to say that when a zoning amendment was presented, the master plan would then be put on the table and see if the zoning amendment is consistent with the master plan, which had already been adopted. And it doesn't, we always have that discussion of whether that's mandatory, whether it means shall or may or whatever, and you just said you think it's advisory. I again say the charter said shall be consistent. It doesn't say may be, might be, advisory only. I mean, I think for a charter to have any kind of impact, you have to read these provisions as having more than simply an advisory nature to them. And it says that the planning board shall solicit public comment and participation through the master planning process, and it talks about how you adopt it. What Brigitte has said to us, which is really important in that slideshow, it has the various state requirements for a master plan, but then there's a whole section of what a community itself can put in. That there are additions to the state, and she mentioned the climate change and the sustainability and smart growth and these kind of things that can be added to the master plan. So the combination, what I'm trying to grapple with is how do we improve the charter provision? How do we be sure it's more followed in the future than it has been to date, and it's been there since at least 1998? And there's a bit of a glimmer in one of the slides, Brigitte, that you presented, which talks about the folks that put together the master plan may become a standing committee and make an annual report, probably through the planning board, to the town meeting on how the master plan has been followed. And there's certainly an implication. This is in your slide number. Slide number 14, which says the implementation committee, this is after it's already been written, can take the lead in evaluating the master plan once a year, could be more often, do an annual review and progress report, and actually suggest amendments if necessary. So it suggests that there's a follow-up committee that looks at the master plan at least annually, sees if it's being followed or not, and points all of this out to the town meeting, and probably that would be through the planning board.
So, Mr. Chairman, we have read this slide and the intent of this slide, and particularly the point you just made, and it's going to inform us in the process of how we actually put together the master plan, this new master plan, or I'm going to say our updated master plan after 2024. And that process is going to be presented on December 7th. At the planning board meeting at 7 p.m. We're a hybrid meeting in this room, or you can watch it on PAC TV. I think it's 24 hours or 48 hours. But in many respects, we have taken this to heart by following a process that has a a task group in it. This was approved in August by the planning board, that we don't move directly to the committee. We have a history of that. We have documentation of how that was done in the past. And that task group could, in essence, with its duties, as it passes off to the master planning committee, then serve as an implementation committee. That may be something that we would vote on or look at, but that will all be discussed and presented on December 7th.
Thank you. Frank?
No, I see a kind of a built-in conflict here in the way that the master plan is being interpreted right now. I really like Brigitta's notion that this document should be, and I think it's intended to be, a forcing document, as you used that term. Is that right, forcing?
Well, yes, the forcing function in science is that when the
Well,
parameters are.
I just
it-
like
it mo-
the use of that term.
I'm going to give you just, though, an example that's used all the time. When you go into the bathroom in an airplane and you lock the door, the light turns on. That's a forcing function. There's no sign, turn on the light.
Well, in some way,
That's a
I
forcing
believe,
function.
and I took your comments as suggesting that the document, that is the master plan, should have a forcing function. Now, Lee brought up the fact that he believes that every master plan has these lofty goals that he said are never attained, they're aspirational. I think that's the ultimate crux of the issue here, that we have to forge, and possibly we have the opportunity to do that in the charter, a document eventually, the master plan, that has as close to specifics as possible, that does not allow for the leeway that I think has been taken with the master plan, that it hasn't been enforced, that we don't have an enforcing mechanism. I would really like to see the charter come up with some aspects, some ideas that make that much more likely to happen. And I think, as Mr. Abbott has said, there are elements in there that give us the opportunity to do that. It has been lofty goals that haven't been attained, in my opinion, as a member of the Planning Board and the Charter Commission. And I would really like to understand and see and find ways that we can make it more of a forcing document, more something that has to be adhered to or is adhered to. And as we move forward in the development of this community, it's becoming a more critical issue. In the past, we had a lot of land and a lot of resources to work with, but those are becoming less and less and less every day. So I think it's even more critical than ever that our master plan is as specific as possible, and that within the charter, we move to make that happen, if possible, if within the realms of the charter.
Bill, go ahead.
So, Frank, yes, I can't agree with you more. I think that one of the things that we have to realize during the planning process, and there's a number of people in the room, I'm looking around, I'm seeing a lot of people that participated in the planning process back in 2004, and a number of their updates. And the master plans, they have great intentions. There's this outline of all the things that we should be doing. But they are lofty in nature, and they only materialize in reality if there is some sort of change to our bylaw to incentivize the permitting process to embrace these concepts. So we do have to create something in the charter that, whether it's a standing committee or whether it's some other entity, this forcing element, I feel like there should be another word rather than forcing, maybe, gentle persuasion, with some attention paid to this idea that we should be going to town meeting with bylaws over a period of time that is implementing the wishes of this, the updated planning process. We've done a lot of planning. I hope that this planning process that we're looking at, it's one thing to go to town meeting looking for money to go hire someone to do this planning process, but before we do that, before we start spending money, let's look at the plans that we have, and see what is in there that's still very relevant. If you look at the 2004 plan, it's very relevant to even today. Even though we've lost a lot of land and there's been a lot of sprawl and a lot of growth and a lot of different things that have happened in the interim, there's been equally number of successes in that planning process. But I'd like to go back to, when we talk about the planning process, I want to go back to the 2004 plan and make sure that we extract from it things that are relevant today. So whoever we hire to begin this planning process has a jump on the process. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're looking back through the planning process that was compiled years ago at great cost and great effort in all the updated versions. But going back to this other point, I think Frank is right. We got to think of the charter and seeing how we can incentivize the implementations of the end result of the Charter Commission through bylaw
Yeah.
changes.
So, Mr. Cohen, I think you're pretty clairvoyant, maybe might not be the right word, but what we're going to be discussing on December 7th on Planning Board is a master planning task group, and their first task is going to be to do a gap analysis on our 2004 master plan. So what does it say we will do? What have we done? If we haven't done it, why? What did we do? What did we do well? How did we accomplish that? So that gap analysis, I think, is hugely important, as you have just articulated, for us to understand how we're going to move forward with a new master plan.
Basically, just building on what we've done to date. There's been a lot of work by the planning department to come up with a planning process and amendments to it, but we should build on that. But at the same time, look at the charter and see how we can create language in the charter to incentivize bylaws that embrace the concept of whatever we end up as a master plan. Thank you.
Hey, no,
If I
Judy.
could.
Wrestling, you actually asked 3 of my questions and you received the answers. I would say great minds think alike, but I don't possess a great mind, so that point is moot. But thank you for those questions. I had the same ones. I think in defense of the master plan, going back to the 1980 village centers concept, I think it was remarkably well written because I'm on the town's building committee, and right now we're investigating fire stations. And a study was done on the fire stations based on response times, number of calls, areas that were responded to, and that study came back that those fire stations are placed ideally. So I think the whole idea of the village centers was very well written and very well thought out, and I realize that this master plan is a fluid document, and it needs to be changed from time to time. So I'm hoping that we can do that. One question I have, and I don't know if it's relevant to the charter, but we recently had a huge brouhaha over a covenant. Is there anything that can be written in legally to a charter that can prevent such things from happening? In other words, if you establish a covenant, should it not go on in perpetuity? Is there something that we can write in to solve that problem?
So, Lee, or
Sure. So if I could, just a few things. So I think that the reference you have to the covenant is the first one that was ever done, 1986. We do things a lot differently now. I think they're a lot tighter, but again, nothing's forever. And I don't think there's any way in the charter you could dictate how that could work. But I think the restrictions we put on place now in developments are much tighter than those old ones. Just a couple other things. If I mention the word lofty goals, there are also a number of very specific items in each master plan too. So I don't want to leave the impression that the master plan just had a bunch of lofty goals. There were a lot of very specific things too. And again, as Brigitte pointed out, we'll go through those item by item. And actually, I have one list that I have put together, and it's pretty striking how many of the recommendations actually get implemented over the years. One other just observation for having staff that serves a number of committees. Every committee that's created takes a certain amount of staff support. So I think a master plan standing committee would be a great thing. The only issue there is that without the staff support, oftentimes these committees struggle to try to get something done, and we will struggle to provide them support. But without that increase in staff, it's sometimes hard to have a committee like that and not give them the kind of support they need. So I think the committee concept is a great one.
It's just making sure that we as staff can give them the kind of support they deserve once it's created. And then the final comment, I'm going to apologize to the chairman because we have a bylaw change coming up at this town meeting, but it's strictly about signs and constitutionality issues with signs. So I think I've heard your comment loud and clear about zoning bylaw changes and how they relate to the master plan, but I think in this case, that would be a hard one to explain through the master plan because it's really more about technical and constitutional issues. But I have heard your comment loud and clear about future zoning articles and some kind of comment in the planning board's report as it relates to the master plan. I think that's a great suggestion or requirement of the charter. Thank you.
I'm going to back up and ask a sort of a higher level governance question. Based on several of the charters I looked at, other towns, the planning board is appointed, not elected. Now, I want to listen to Birgitta and Lee and my fellow commissioners to see if there is questions or concerns about that. I could see, based on again reading things, there would be accountability because those individuals would be sort of appointed by the select board or whatever the appointing authority, so that instead of any finger pointing, all the accountability ultimately would fall to the appointing authority. I personally am in listening mode. I have no opinion one way or the other, but I'd be curious for the public, but also Birgitta and Lee, if you've heard that appointed planning boards are as effective, not as accountable in terms of how they're structured and who they report to.
Yeah, I think that the question that you asked, David, which is actually a very relevant question, comes up often. I'm going to just say boards of health, the majority of boards of health are elected and not appointed. But here in Plymouth, we appoint our Board of Health. But our ability to actually assess the effectiveness of a planning board, and particularly their ability to write and maintain a master plan, I think that it's out of our scope to be able to actually pin that back to the election versus appointment. That would be a very hard thing to do if we compare ourselves to other communities and take a look, because anyone that's about our size is most likely going to be a city, and their ordinances work differently around planning than does a town.
I think, David, I'd like to see a real good debate of that issue. I think we should debate it, of elected versus appointed planning board.
Yeah, and
Maybe not
that
tonight,
applies,
but I think-
Birgitta's reminding me, that applies to Board of
Right.
Health. I mean, that
I think
applies
it
to
should be on
some
our agenda.
major responsible committees, and it's a good question. And it also might be one to ask some of our guests from other
Right.
towns in terms of,
Yep.
Right.
how it works in their towns. Because
Yeah.
again, I'm in a listening mode, but I've seen it structured both ways.
No, I think it's a very crucial question. We should certainly debate it. And I see pluses and minuses. I don't know if we have time tonight, but we certainly should come back to it.
Good, thank you.
I want to welcome the chair of the planning board, Paul Bacalda. Welcome to the Charter Commission. Do you have anything you want to suggest in terms of the master plan and how it's going and what your thoughts are?
Well, let me clarify one thing to start with. I'm not the chair, I'm merely a member. I'm very interested in the Charter Commission. I've been on many of them, and I think they're a great thing to have. My opinion on planning board members should be elected, because if they don't do their job, they can be unelected, and somebody else can take their place. When appointed, you could have somebody that likes them and wants to keep them on because they will do what they want and not what is the good of the town. I wouldn't be surprised to see the town of Plymouth someday becomes a city and has a mayor and a city council. I'm not in favor or against that, but I think that's a very likely scenario that will happen. Thank you very much.
Paul? Other questions, comments? All right, well, thank you very much, Brigitte, and thank you, Lee. and
Thank you
Paul.
all.
Okay.
So I'm sure we'll be returning to the planning board in a future meeting. So, Betsy, could you speak up, because I don't... Yep, I didn't hear what you asked.
Perhaps it's a good idea to add elected versus appointed
Oh,
committees or
you
boards
mean
to
the
this,
tracking
to
schedule?
our tracking
Yeah,
schedule.
we're going to come back to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
And I guess now's probably a good time to do it, since you brought it up. The tracking schedule that Michelle put together, which was in the package, which is a list of probably, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 items at this point. And most of them are phrased as a question, sort of as yes or no. Is it something you think that should go into the charter, or do you think it's just not appropriate for the charter? And I would like to suggest that, we're going to keep expanding that list, but in the meantime, between now and the next meeting, it would be really helpful if you went through it and initial, there's a column there that's blank, and initial whether you're in favor of it or not in favor of it. And then as we can start then to narrow the issues that are going to take further discussion. These are a lot of the hot points that you can say yes or no on. And then turn it in, and we'll collate it and see which items need discussion, which items we're pretty unanimous on, and which items are just non-starters. And it's already grown to 4 pages since we started this. So Betsy, yes, as issues come up, we're going to certainly add to the list. I think every night we'll probably add many new points. So to return to the item we started last week, which was the Finance Committee. And I think if you look at the minutes that Michelle did, we discussed the makeup of the committee and the role of the Finance Committee, what it was going to actually advise on or not advise. We didn't really get into how it was appointed. So why don't we spend a few minutes, if you want to say something about the role of the Finance Committee? In other words, what's its role with respect to town meeting, or who's on the Finance Committee? And we discussed various towns. Many towns put town meeting members on the Finance Committee. And then how it's appointed, which we didn't discuss. So let's have that discussion. So I just make a couple of points at the beginning. Well, for example, Brookline, which is one of the guests I hope we're going to have in January, they appoint their Finance Committee, and they actually say there must be a town meeting member on the Finance Committee. And because they feel it's definitely worthwhile to have a town meeting member from each precinct, on the Finance Committee. The town of Sharon has an interesting process where they actually nominate a committee, and that committee then appoints the Finance Committee. So the moderator and the town meeting pick 5 people to serve as a nominating committee for the Finance Committee. They view the Finance Committee as that important a committee. And then that committee gets together and chooses members of the Finance Committee, and then they serve for a year. And then a new nominating committee is established at each town meeting. So that's how Sharon does it. So I know there's a lot of discussion about how Plymouth does it, and it's come up each time there's a charter review, whether it's going to continue to be appointed all by the moderator or by more than just the moderator. And at the last time the charter was reviewed, the moderator's authority to appoint the Charter Review Committee was dispersed a bit, so that's now a 3-member committee to appoint that committee that reviews the charter every 5 years. But as far as the Finance Committee goes, the moderator continues to be the sole appointing authority. Comments or questions on this point? Bill?
So I would I think that, that we should try to streamline the process so there is some simplicity to it that makes it more likely to be adhered to, because I see that at different times, there's elements in our charter that get kind of complicated and things fall through the cracks. Example would be, the two-thirds vote required at town meeting to hear something that didn't appear 14 days in advance of town meeting. So we've had that discussion. So when I think of this, I try to simplify it. I know that there was a lot of discussions with the past charter committee. I would look at, we appoint a finance committee, but we share that responsibility between the precinct chairs and the moderator and the Board of Select, where they're choosing people to sit on this. But they're choosing it from the legislative branch. They're choosing town meeting members, and that's important. That the one thing I want to make sure is that the people that are going to be voting on this budget and debating on this budget are part of the budget process and are well-versed on that, on the mechanics of it. So how we appoint should be an opportunity to allow different components of the government to have some sort of say in what the FinCom looks like, but it should still reside in town meeting's control and power.
David Peck?
Well, again, this is not a personal comment, but just reading our charter and just thinking of a single person having the appointing authority could be subject to abuse. That single person appointing could appoint friends or kind of influence the finance committee in a direction. Not saying that has ever happened necessarily, but I share Bill's idea that some kind of shared appointing responsibility with timeliness, maybe with alternates too, to fill the vacant positions, but I just think our current language is potential subject to abuse, even though we heard the moderator tell us that, something needs to be timely, he has vacancies and so on, but just reading it, it puts just too much, I think, a potential ability for abuse by a single person.
Yeah, we're always looking for checks and balances. Larry?
I think you might have actually hit on a solution. If we were to have alternates for the Finance Committee, and the alternates were appointed by the moderator, that would mean that the decision that needs to be made immediately, which the moderator discussed with us, or with the charter committee that previously sat, would be met, but that these people would basically be replaced when the larger group met, because the moderator, not being a committee, doesn't have to post meetings and can make an immediate decision, and therefore the need for speed is met. But if the alternate is sitting until the larger committee gets together and makes its appointment, that would solve the problem. The problem of getting people to serve on the committee, because it's a pretty onerous responsibility, that's a whole separate matter, but that's something that this larger group would be able to address.
Who would be the larger group? You mean the larger appointing committee?
Well, I mean, it seems as though the moderator should continue to be part of the process. And, the obvious candidates are, possible candidates are the select board and the committee of precinct chairs.
Which is the way the Charter Review Committee is appointed in our current charter, which is a 3-member committee consisting of the moderator who serves as the chairman, a member of the select board, and a member of the committee of precinct chairs. And that committee of three then appoints the charter review committee every 5 years. So that committee could also do the finance committee.
That would, put some consistency across different responsibilities that creates this natural knowledge of when it comes to a charter commission, how does the charter commission get appointed? How does the FinCom get appointed? I like what Larry's saying, that the moderator does have this ability to respond quickly in a scenario where we don't have time to appoint, and that the moderator could be reserved for the temporary appointments. And then when they expire, then they'd have to apply through the normal channels to be a permanent member. But that's a way of expediting what your concern there by using the moderator's authority in that manner, and using the precinct chairs and the FinCom on the, precinct chairs and select board as the appointing authority.
Yeah, I mean, the charter review committee only happens every 5 years, so it would be a quintennial committee, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, any other comments? Betsy?
Yes, thank you, Bill. I do think that the job of being on the Finance Committee would be much less onerous if they didn't have to hear every single thing on the warrant, including maybe an item about circuses or dogs or whatever it is, because that can take up time. So rather than an advisory and Finance Committee, having just a Finance Committee, I have noticed many towns do not have the Finance Committee do other than finances and budget. So I think that we could maybe attract more experts in the finance area, as well as people who know they're not going to be bogged down with non-financial items. So that would be one recommendation. Also, the town of Sharon has a priorities committee. And the priorities committee looks at the whole town budget and spending for future years. The finance committee needs to be focused on that town meeting at that time. But I think it would be a wonderful thing to have another committee that's looking at the next 10 years and really looking at where are our fixed costs going. One of the things I would love to have is, as a town meeting member, is have someone come in and say, here's where we're heading. Here's 10 years down the road, what we see happening in our town. And I'm not saying the Finance Committee never does that, but they really need to focus on that one fall or spring town meeting that they're working from. So I would love to see us, I don't know if we'd call it a priorities committee, we might call it something else, but
That was one of the charters we reviewed, had a priority committee.
yeah, Sharon does
Sharon,
have something,
right.
yeah, called a priority committee, and we wouldn't have to call it that. But the duties of this committee are to do forecasting for the town, for example, and find out what the sources of funding will be forecasting down the road. So, and of course, we have a fabulous finance director who would certainly, probably be part of this committee. So in Sharon, it's 6 people
Right.
that are part of that forecasting committee. Thank you.
David Malaguti?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Betsy, because in the minutes of the meeting, you'll see that I made the same suggestion. I think we should separate the financial and non-financial articles. The only thing I disagree in the minutes of the meeting, and also for discussion too, is the role of the Finance Committee in developing the budget. Yes, it's nice to have financial people on the Finance Committee. It doesn't always happen. Most often, it's common citizens, and I would say that the role of developing the budget, as it is outlined in our present charter, which is the town manager meets with the department heads along with the finance director, that's presented to the selectmen, and then the selectmen okay it and then send it to the Finance Committee. I say let the professionals develop the budget. I think that's a far more effective way to do it. If you had the ultimate situation where you had a whole bunch of retired financial people on the Finance Committee, then I'd say, yes, bring them into the process early. But that doesn't always happen. So I think the professionals should develop the budget.
Thank you. Right.
And I want to, when I suggest that, when I suggest that the Finance Committee should be building a budget, I guess that we need to clarify that and understand what I actually mean, is that I want them in, when we had, I think it was, we had a Finance Committee member, and that was talking about how they're currently building a budget and where they're brought in the process. I do think it would be, if you have right now, currently, they have these subcommittees that work with different departments, and obviously, if someone wanted to be on a subcommittee on the Finance Committee during this process, it would be nice to have them participating at an early point in time. But I agree with you. I think that we have to rely on the professionals. We have to rely on our town manager to build and assemble the budget. But with a FinCom that's going to vote on it, I do think that they should be part of this process as it develops. They should be aware of it. But in the end, the final, it's currently, right now, I believe it's the town manager who looks at each different department and suggests what that department is going to have for the next fiscal year. Is that correct? Yeah, so that, I agree with you. We should protect the process that we have, but I'm just wanting to see how we can introduce the FinCom to this process so they can be better prepared to discuss it and debate it.
Larry?
The idea of dividing the Finance Committee from the Advisory Committee sounds, I suspect, more attractive than it will turn out to be. If you go through not to say that there's nothing, zoning bylaws are a time-consuming matter, as are town bylaws. Other than committee appointments, that's pretty much all there is, other than financial matters. When you go through the budget, the community preservation matters, what we call Article 7, the budget itself, Article 9, the capital part of the budget, and the selectmen's salaries, all of the pieces that you go through, Chapter 80, 90, 112, the highway money, 90, money, so it's not a bad idea, but to have an entirely separate committee that would need to be supported, we might want to give some serious consideration to whether or not we're accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish. Maybe, but
So
it makes me a little nervous.
It seems to be, the planning board is certainly capable of doing zoning articles, and the finance committee, finance articles, and next week, or actually December 13th, our next meeting is going to hopefully be devoted to a discussion of the role of the committee of precinct chairs. And that committee already, as is one of its duties, is to propose bylaws, new bylaws to be added to our existing bylaws. And we can discuss on the 13th whether or not the Committee of Precinct Chair should take on an advisory role, for example, with respect to non-finance articles, but without having to create just another committee. Okay, so any further discussion on this point? I'd like the next. Yes, wrestling, I see your hands up. Go ahead.
Yes. I think that it seems to me that most of us really want to take a hard look at the Finance Committee and really look at how we want this to work.
Right.
I really like Bill's suggestion of having some town meeting members be part of it. I really think that we should look how they're appointed. They're a pretty important group, and I really think that we should really get into the nitty gritty when it comes to the FinCom and look at how we really want it to look. I think that it should be mostly financial stuff that they look at. And I think that, a lot of what we're looking at, I think this is something that should be majorly, revamped.
Right. It's interesting, Russell, you make that point, because I think we've reviewed over 30 charters, and they all do centralize on the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee
Yeah.
is probably the most important committee in any of those charters. You can see that it's a central focus.
Yeah.
So you're right, yep. I'd like just to have moved another item on our review agenda here, and that is maybe we can skip over the moderator tonight, take that up in the future, but I wanted to talk a bit about the Select Board and its function, because, we are a town of checks and balances, and I think we need to spell out in the charter in more detail what the Select Board's duties and functions are in our form of government. And one proposal that was made previously was actually a charter that I reviewed, which was the town of Billerica, which had a whole section on the Select Board. And again, I will just read the three sentences. It says, "The Board of Selectmen shall serve as the chief policy-making agency of the town, responsible for the issuance of policy directives and guidelines to be followed by all town agencies serving under it." And here's the key. "Provided, however, that no individual member of this Board of Selectmen, nor a majority of them, shall at any time attempt to become involved in the day-to-day administration of the affairs of the town. It is the intention of this provision that the Board of Selectmen shall act only through the adoption of policy directives and guidelines which are to be implemented by officers and employees appointed by or under its authority." So that's a very clear statement of what a Select Board's function is. And I think we should spend some time when we actually, if we go that route and we're going to have a Board of Selectmen, we should spend some time and develop that in the charter.
Bill?
Yes, David?
That is clearly spelled out in our present charter, and I firmly believe that that's the way we should go, because in the charters that I've reviewed, whether it's council town manager, whether it's selectman town manager, it's all very clear that the governing body, whether it be the selectmen or whether it be a council, the separation between the executive branch, shall we say, and the workers is very clear. That separation exists in every charter that I've reviewed, and also the charters that this board has reviewed. So I think that's a very important thing. They should not be involved in the day-to-day operations of the departments. Again, that should be left to the professionals. And I will say, through the years, there were many times I intervened and got into certain, shall we say, situations, but I would always run it through the town manager. Many times, Melissa would say to me, "That's a DPW issue. Your whole life has been construction. Deal with it." But I always cleared it with her first, and I think that should remain the way it is. It should be through the town manager. Let the professionals run the town.
Right, thank you. Betsy Hall.
This is from the Dartmouth Charter. "Nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize any member of the Select Board, nor a majority of such members, to become involved in the day-to-day administration of any town agency. It is the intention of this provision that the Select Board shall act only through the adoption of broad policy guidelines, which are to be implemented by officers and employees serving under it." So I think that's really, really about as clear as you can get. One of the questions that I ask myself when I'm looking at the charter is, why was this put in the first place? Why did someone feel the need to write that? Because if we're going to think about what to take out or what to put in, well, why was it in there in the first place? Let's not take anything out of the charter till we know why it ever went in there. And I think in this particular case, what I can see is a select person, unwittingly perhaps, or perhaps on purpose, doing favors for friends, relatives, neighbors, and gaining some power through that, or gaining some influence through that. And I think that that's why this provision is there, is to prevent any person from using their power and influence as a select board to do favors for any particular person in the town.
Well, and
By
I'll just
jumping
say-
over, excuse me just one second,
Yeah.
by jumping over, the process. So if I were to go to, a select person and say, I want blah, 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 and they, oh, I can get that for you, I think that the original language is trying to prevent that. And perhaps we can go back, anytime we're talking about changing a charter section, we need to ask, why is it there in the first place? Why did they put it there before we talk about taking it out? Thank you.
I'd just say, charters I looked at all had language that just said, no individual member shall give orders or directions either publicly or privately to any employee of the town.
David, what charter is that?
I'm looking at Amherst.
That's excellent,
but
I
what-
think.
Amherst, right.
But I saw it in others as well. I just happened to open this one up.
Yeah, we want to keep track of where this language is when we need it.
Yeah.
Larry?
I think, as a historian on this group, Plymouth has moved over the past 70 years from having a select board that was super involved because they were the people, to adding a secretary, executive secretary, and then from that, a town manager. So that while I share your concern that could happen, I think historically, it's sometimes the feelings of the group lag behind the realities of the situation. And what used to be the case where a select person would be expected to involve himself or herself in a particular project, the idea of making it clear that there is a central authority through which it should run is a good one. But this brings up another role of the select board. Clearly, in the present Plymouth charter, the town manager is a central figure. But I think it needs to be made very clear that this central figure serves at the behest of the select board, so that while we're saying, on the one hand, that if you want something specific accomplished, you go through the town manager, it's also the case that if the select board feels that the town manager is not performing his or her responsibilities adequately, that board needs to provide guidance or more serious direction than that. So, yes, we should have a select board that is doing policy, but one of the pieces of policy is supervising the town manager.
I like the way he refers to me as a historian. That's another politically correct saying, old you-know-what. Yes, go back 60, 70 years. Cozy Barrett. Everybody knows or has heard of Cozy Barrett. 3 selectmen, a secretary to the Board of Selectmen, okay? You called up Cozy. I need a liquor license. Okay, we'll see what we can do, all right? But this is, many years later, the town is much more complex, okay? If you have every individual selectman dealing with every little issue to every department head, how do they get the big things done? Do you say to Lynn Barrett, stop your work on the budget because I want to get this information? Do you say to JB, I know you got your crews all placed, I know you've got your work all figured out, you're going to do road repairs over here, you're going to cut brush over there, but stop that and do this. You can't have that. You have to have a central figure that you go through, and then it's up to that central figure to say, okay, let's do this, let's do that, let's not do this, let's not do that. But you can't have all 5 selectmen going to each department head with their own little whims and wishes. You can't do that. It's not efficient government. Did it work in the old days? Yeah, back when we had 16,000 people. We had probably 6 DPW workers, okay? Now we've got what, maybe 40 in a department? I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a whole different ballgame. So you can't have all these people interjecting their ideas.
But that does,
Bill?
that does bring up an interesting point, though, that obviously if a selectman has something that they want to express, they need to express it to the town manager, and the town manager needs to take it to, process it the best and most efficient way. But at the same time, people in this town are elected to represent the interest of the people. And sometimes a selectman's going to get a call looking for help. And what I call this is, it's the elected official wants to respond to the public efficiently also, because they've been elected. It's kind of a thing of, it's pretty much what I'm thinking about is constituent services. Residents who elect people to office have a question, they go to their elected official, they should get some sort of efficient answer from that elected official. So what I think is that what the town lacks in this scenario is that they do not have any constituent services or something set up internally so that can be processed. So when the request comes to the elected official goes to the town manager and conveys this concern. It is processed and given back to the elected official so they can go back to the constituent and say, I addressed the issue that you had. That resolves the anxiety of the elected official. Let's face it, they're elected and people are asking them questions and they want to keep their constituents happy. There's something there that we have to think about in terms of handling those issues. Because when you contact a state representative's office or a senator's office or down to Washington, it's the same thing. They have these offices and they have constituent services. There are people that are working on it. But they have them working on it in a way that doesn't interfere with their day-to-day operations. There's someone dedicated to processing it, so there's no loss of efficiency in the Department of Public Works or whatever department this request is coming in, because it's going through the proper channels. And anything that we can do to avoid the confusion that could be created by 5 different selectmen calling 5 different people, would be a good idea. But I think I agree, we need to protect the town, that we need to protect the department head to be efficient about their time and their employees in working with their boss, the town manager, but at the same time finding a way where constituents can interact with their elected officials in an efficient way and getting their questions answered. Thank you.
And Bill, if I might, I don't disagree with what Bill Cohan is saying. There should be some individual that you go to, okay? I get that. But let me give you an example of what I did with a prior town manager. I brought it up to her personally. Nothing was done for a week. So I said to her again, what gives? The second week, I had no response. I brought it up publicly and I said, this needs to be done. So now, not only does she know, but the whole town knows. And ultimately, that town manager was removed. She resigned from pressure for the board because she was inefficient and there were a lot of things falling through the cracks. So there are ways to do it. The problem we have in our present society is we demand instant response, okay? We demand instant action, and that doesn't always happen, and we have to be realistic. But it's kind of hard when you order something on Amazon and you get it the next day. So it's kind of hard to make that argument, but really, seriously, I mean, you see on Facebook, I don't put a lot on Facebook. I respond humorously sometimes, and I will add information type of things, but I don't put a lot on Facebook. But you see on Facebook, there's a helicopter hovering over Standish Plaza. What's going on? Well, are you being hurt? No. Is anybody you know involved? No. Then you know what? Don't worry about it. But we want instant gratification. We want instant response. And I never, ever promised anybody all through the years, 22 years, I never promised anybody that it would be dealt with immediately. I said, we will get to this and we will solve the problem. And we did.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Larry,
I'm sorry. Somebody else?
Supervisor, then Frank.
As the recipient of town manager inquiry, I got many times when I was clerk the statement that one of the select board asked if something could be accomplished. Can it? And if so, do it. And I actually reported through someone to the town manager, but basically reported to the town manager. And of course, that was something that I could do. While I have the microphone, if I could, one of the pieces that the select board gets involved in and spends a lot of time with is licensing. And I wonder if there might be, I mean, they have divested themselves of dog hearings and other things that, wisdom is advisable, but there's nothing to stop them from appointing a licensing board. For those of you who've read the charter, appointing also gives the opportunity to unappoint. And therefore, if a licensing board was not doing in the very general direction of what the select board wanted them to do, not very difficult to get a new licensing board to do that work. But it just seems to me that if we are burdening the select board with too many little responsibilities, they don't have the time for the bigger ones, like setting policy for the town.
Larry, that point on the licensing function is one of the tracking items on your schedule. So you can, because I think that came up at an earlier meeting, and
Yep.
that's one of the yes or no's.
Number 5 with
Another thing
DP
that
next
we-
to it.
Okay.
Yeah, we have talked about it.
So the evening is going along here. There's a couple things we need to cover tonight. One of them, which I just want to get your okay on, is our budget, which we're going to have in the town meeting for the fiscal year starting July 1st through June 30th, 2023. And I'm working with Michelle, our staff, and trying to get the necessary input. So basically, Michelle's time would be in the budget at $10,000 for that 12-month period. I have a inquiry into Lauren Goldberg at Copeland and Page, not saying that we're necessarily going to hire Copeland and Page, but just to get an estimate of what they think a law firm would charge us when we get down to the drafting. And she's going to get back to me with a sum for the whole project or an hourly rate, and then we need to make a determination. But I have in the budget an estimate of $30,000 if we can't, hopefully they may come in less than that. Perhaps even considerably less if we do a lot of that work ourselves. The big item, and this is one we can't avoid, is the printing costs, because the statute has it says double requirement. It says that we must publish in the newspaper our preliminary report in September. And typically that's like at least four single-spaced pages of newspaper copy that runs approximately $1,900 to $2,000 a page. So you're looking at least $8,000 for the legally required publication, which is right in the general statute here. And I checked with Copeland and Page to see if that was still current requirement, because it seemed rather outmoded that we had to publish in a newspaper when you have so much internet availability, and she said it is still in the statute. So we still have to publish it. We can publish it in small print, legal notice size print, but it still has to be in there. And then the second requirement, which is probably even more expensive, is the final report, which is the actual charter that's going to go on the ballot a few months later, has to be sent, it doesn't say mailed necessarily, but provided, sent and delivered to every household containing a registered voter. And we're trying to get a fix on that. If there's a way we can deliver it to households at a great fraction of the postal cost. So I'm waiting for an estimate to come back on that one. But those are the three components of our budget: staff, legal counsel, and printing. And you have to put it together within the next 10 days. So that's where it is, if anybody has any questions. It's pretty straightforward. We're looking at the previous charter commissions to see what they spent, and hopefully we will do the best we can to save money. And the,
Mr. Chairman, do you need a
Yes.
motion to
Yes, I think
authorize you to?
that would be great.
In that case, I would move that we authorize the chair to produce a budget for the next fiscal year.
Right. Thank you.
I'll second.
So a motion has been made and seconded that I produce as chair the budget for the fiscal year 2023, starting next July 1st. And this has to be by roll call because we have one member present on Zoom. So I'll take a roll call vote, and I'll start with our Zoom attendee, Wrestling Brewster. Yes or no?
Yes.
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 David
Yes.
Peck, yes. Betsy Hall, nodding yes. David Malaguti?
Yes.
Larry Pizer?
Yes.
Bill Cohan?
Yes.
Frank Mann?
Yes.
And Scott Vecchi?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We've got 3 minutes before public comment. Maybe what we can do with the indulgence of the board is take the public comment right now and get through the public comment, and then we'll come back to the timeline and our meetings coming up and invitees from other towns and so forth. I'd like to cover the timeline for the next few months to see where we are. So at the moment, open it up for public comment.
My name's Richard Caproni. I reside in Precinct 15. Former town meeting member, former advisory board member at the Center for Active Living, and all around political gadfly, I guess, is what you'd call me. It's a certain irony tonight that we sit here and we're talking about the town charter and our town government, and we do not have a town manager this very day, okay? I find it distressing. Maybe you don't, okay? I guess the facts and circumstances of what's gone on over the last week will be published at some particular point, but I'm very sorry to see Melissa go, and I'm very sorry to see her go earlier than was planned. It tells me there's a dysfunction in the town government here in Plymouth, and it's an example of the dysfunction of the town government here in Plymouth. Just a few of my comments, and I won't even use the 7-minute. Master plans, plans are made. There's a lot of strategic thinking in that plan. I hear discussions amongst various boards, and nobody's thinking strategically in this town. Everybody seems to be trying to put out a fire, all right, or to advocate for some particular project that was probably needed to be taken care of 20 years ago, but because it wasn't, because of our existing form of government, we now have to deal with an existing problem in a crisis mode. Master plans are good. Strategic plans are better. We got to think up here, okay? Everybody's too busy down here. That's my comment. I hear about the planning board listening to the local village steering committees. I don't know if that's ever happened before, and I personally doubt that it will happen, okay? That this is maybe something on somebody's wish list. I hear you talk about a number of issues, and one of the issues that's very important to all the citizens in this town is growth. People in business understand that you grow or you die, all right? Many towns and many municipalities in Massachusetts and across the nation, because they've lost their local businesses, are in the process of dying because they cannot grow. This town can grow if the people leading the town will let it grow. And I don't see that happening at these commission hearings or at other public meetings. We talked about where to start. Where to start with the planning commission, where to start with the master plan. It's a simple fact of life. Everything we do and everything we encounter, there's low-hanging fruit. There's stuff that's easy to do, but I watch the deliberations of the leaders of this town, and nothing is easy to do. The moderator. There's no question the moderator has too much power. The recent charter committee tried to dilute some of that power, and he was able to push them off, although a few tweaks were made. The situation with the moderator is got to be unacceptable to anybody on this board. He has too much power. The finance committee should be broken up into finance section and an advisory section. And the finance committee should not have people sitting on it that are political pundits, and they're not people of finance. And that is not the case as we sit here and watch deliberations of the finance committee when the time comes. The finance committee it's a mess.
Mr. Caprone, could you, maybe one more minute of
Okay,
public comment?
I'm almost done with my last point. Number of times people have said on selectmen duties, let the professionals do their job. Okay, I don't see it happening anywhere. Okay, we have professionals, we have people with skills. Okay, but we don't acknowledge them, and we don't make it easy for them to contribute to the way of life here in Plymouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caprone. Rabbi Silverman? Welcome.
I hope you can hear me all right. My
could
hearing
take this
is
down a
not
bit
so
if you want.
good. I've been here for a long time.
Rabbi, do you
And
want
I
to,
grew
take
up-
your mask down a little bit, we can hear.
And I grew up in a town with about as many people as we have here in Plymouth. And I loved it that we had town meeting. And that town that I grew up in was Brookline, and it's still having town meeting, and 60,000 people. I loved it because I knew those people as a kid. The town meeting members. And every now and then a selectman or a select woman later would be pointed out to me, or the head of a department. And we have all of that. And if our future is looking like we're at a special turning point, I would remind you that town meeting has put us there. It has been the heart of our people. Sign up, run for office, and when we have a collective town meeting, 95% of the town meeting members are going to show up because it's so important to them. I've given invocations and occasionally have spoken to someone who missed the town meeting. They were heartbroken, but something happened in their personal lives that kept them away. They didn't go bowling. Town meeting means something to the people who seek it, and they seek it for the sake of our community. Brookline is still a town. There are towns that have become cities. Once upon a time, Chelsea was one of them. 18,000 people per square mile live in Chelsea. Do you know what the number is in Plymouth? 600. 600 people per square mile. It's one of the low numbers. Because we're not only about downtown Plymouth and North Plymouth and the mall over here and so forth. We're about the woods. We're about the farms. Give me a city that has 30 farms of different types. Cranberry, fish runs, and so forth. They're all over the place. They're not right here in downtown in North Plymouth, but you'll find them in Chiltonville, you'll find them in Cedarville and in Manamet. You will find farms. People come from other places to see them. Years ago, we had a Tidmarsh farm. It was a commercial cranberry farm in Plymouth. In 2010, 200 acres of farmland was taken out of production on the east side of the property and placed under a conservation easement. This easement led to a grooming of the woods, to a digging up of a stream that wasn't going anywhere, until finally Beaver Dam Brook opened from its headquarters all the way to Cape Cod Bay for the first time in over a century. Animals began to come back. This place is not just about human beings. Animals, these creatures that had been driven away, in many of them, came back. Tidmarsh East, as it came to be called, was purchased by the Mass Audubon Society and opened as a wildlife sanctuary 3.5 years ago. This didn't hit the newspapers very well. I don't think they knew what to do with this. But the Audubon Society means something. It's been there for many years. And we mean something when we say this kind of conservation is good. and town meeting and a board of selectmen and a town manager brought us to that point. This system isn't failing. There's no other town, or for that matter, city, like Plymouth in all of Massachusetts. 134 square miles, a quarter of that is water. More than 400 ponds in this town. There's a lot of taking care of nature that we are obliged to take care of living here because we are the caretakers. That is what we do. I see Plymouth as having a very promising future as a town because we've gotten to where we are as a town with 60,000 people. Things are very different in Brookline, where I grew up. Did I tell you? Less than 6 square miles in all of Brookline, 60,000 people. And they're hanging on. They want to keep their town government. And I hope we do too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Any questions for Rabbi Silverman? I recognize Mr. Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Peter Neville. I'm from Precinct 10, soon to be exported over to Precinct 5. Just a quick note. First, I need some help. I can't find in the charter where the moderator is charged with the duty of creating the charter commission. I just can't find it.
Creating what?
Where in the charter
Very last
is
page.
the moderator given the responsibility of creating the charter commission?
Go to the end of the charter, Peter.
Last page, last paragraph.
Paragraph 20, page 24. Actually, wait a minute.
There it is, 761. Thank you.
Yep, right.
I'm going to go back to the discussion about the planning board, section 14, and I really appreciate the amount of time you spent on it. I've read this section quite a bit, and it strikes me that I can't remember being at a town meeting where the provisions for reporting were made so clear to me as a town meeting member that within the charter, within the context of the charter, Lee Hartman would come and say, I am now going to speak to section 3.14-1, which covers the Open Space Committee, which has been appointed by the director of, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but it's all in the charter. And the requirement to report is within the charter. So when I look at this and I see the duty of reporting that's in the charter, I think it's a whole damn town meeting. You're not going to get through in one day if everybody reports in the context of the charter, and even further, within the context of the comprehensive master plan. There's been allusions to we updated. It's been revised. Well, would be, what's the context for that? As a town meeting member, I'd like to be educated. If this is what we're operating with, I think there should be some reference back to it that, I guess, gives some form to what we're representing as town meeting members. I hope I said that right. Anyway, that gets me back to the moderator, and I find that the moderators need some guidance, if you will, on his selection process. And there needs to be some checks and balances for that process written into the charter. I find that the charter is very clear about the role of select persons And I think that they're, without, you know, a harsh wrap of a rule or language preventing them from circumventing the duties and the responsibilities of the town manager, I think that the select board's definition is pretty clear about create the policies. I agree with Mr. Malaguti in terms of maybe we need a licensing board. Somebody could take care of the day-to-day stuff. They don't have to be bothered with that. But the moderator's position clearly would benefit from some language which prescribes how he goes about selecting, because he will admit that he picks people according to his criteria, and he will say it's his criteria. It's not for the public. And I think as the charter is giving him so much responsibility, the charter ought to circumscribe or perhaps help provide a criteria for those appointments. I think that's the least we can do. So that's it, kids. Thank you for letting me speak. Thank you for your hard work. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Larry Pizer.
Mr. Neville, just wanted to say that you were talking about reports and changes going to town meeting members. That's what the town report is. The official function of the town report is a report of many of the divisions and departments and boards and committees to the town meeting.
Yeah, Larry, I understand that,
Okay.
but no one has ever said to me, under section 7-16 of the town charter, I am now going to present the report for the Open Space Committee, which falls into that section. There's no context.
Mr. Neville, just on the Open Space Committee, since I do remember how that got in the charter that you're referring to, that, at the time that charter was written, it was thought, because of Plymouth and its size and its undeveloped land, that the Open Space Committee was an absolutely crucial committee. And the charter drafters wanted to elevate that point by stating, and I think it's really one of the only places in the charter that says that the Open Space Committee shall report to the town meeting.
Yeah.
I think if you go through the charter, you're not going to find any other committees that have that requirement. And whether or not they actually make that report to the town meeting, of course, is up to the Open Space Committee. They're supposed to under the charter.
Yeah, they have done it, the Open Space Committee has done it, but the power of that statement in the charter protects the Open Space Committee from sending articles to town meeting. So there was a direct line of communication. You weren't sending articles at the pleasure of the Board of Selectmen on the warrant. You had this ability to avoid some of the hazards that could encroach on the Open Space Committee's ability to function. So the thought was to give it this independence, so it was going directly to town meeting.
Yeah.
So yes, they do reserve the opportunity to go to town meeting and present a report. They have done it occasionally in the past, but really, the power that incurs when you do that allows this committee to have, some independence and not to be encroached on. So that's an important thing. I think that the Open Space Committee needs not only to exist, but also exist in an environment where it can't be encroached on or curtailed in its efforts to make recommendations to town meetings. So that's the, having served on the Open Space Committee, the power of that language in the charter gave the committee that control of the situation.
Bill, I agree with what you're saying, right? What I'm trying to suggest here tonight is that perhaps there's a way to bring some vitality to this charter. I mean, it's ironic, through the town meeting, or at the town meeting. We do these things because it's in the charter, it's reflected in the charter, it's supported in the charter, and that's why we're here. I'd ask you to take a look at the the whole planning board section to see whether or not we're really getting what we say we're going to do there in that charter section at town meeting. I don't think we do. I don't think that the comprehensive master plan is a vital instrument, and it should be.
Right.
Thank
Well,
you.
this is the job we have coming up, right. So, looking at the agenda tonight, coming up, the December 13th meeting is I think should be a full discussion of the Committee of Precinct Chairs and its role. Hopefully, we'll get some past chairs as well as the current chairs coming to that meeting. And then in January 3rd and January 24th, which are our two meeting dates, I'd like to suggest that those are the meetings where we're going to listen to people from other towns that have, and their charters that have forms of government like ours, or town councils, and get their ideas and how things are functioning. And we're coming up already with the list for that. I have David Peck has presented names of a couple of councilors from Amherst, a councilor from the town of Watertown, and I think you're also working on Barnstable. So that's going to be very interesting. Betsy has a person from Brewster who's very familiar with several towns on the Cape, the larger towns, and also Barnstable. And
Yeah, if I may interject, Mr. Chairman.
who's speaking? Oh, David.
This Dave, you know, that January 3rd turns out to be when both the Watertown and Amherst councils meet. You know, so they're competing directly with Monday evening meetings. Both the ones we've talked to so far have said, not the 3rd, because that's the swearing in of new councilors, because they're elected in November, and so that's when they come in. The Amherst ladies, two have, answered, but they said the 24th is their next meeting, and is there a possibility of, a different evening? I mean, they're
How are they?
they're happy to participate, they want to participate, and that got me thinking that the first couple months of our meetings were on Thursdays, and not I think we were moved to Mondays because of conflicts with COPC or FinCom. Is there a chance, at least for some of the invitations, we could go back to Thursday, at least for a meeting or two, so we can not compete with, the same
Well, David, could you
evenings
first
they meet.
see if they're available on maybe the 7th of February?
Okay, is that another Monday?
That's a Monday.
Okay, well, it's just, the Amherst people meet on Mondays, but
Well, see if-
I can inquire.
Because we've reserved this room for the 7th and the 14th of February, as well as those 2 dates in January.
Okay.
And see if they can make it that night. As far as Thursdays go, won't the Finance Committee be usurping them because we're getting closer and closer to town meeting? Start right in January.
I don't know, I just knew, Thursday was working for us for a couple months, and then we switched to
Yeah, but I
Monday.
think we ran into a clear conflict with the Finance Committee, but. Pardon me?
Plus the Committee of Precinct Chairs. Some of the members here are also on the Committee of Precinct Chairs, and they meet on Thursday, the third Thursday. At least they used to. I don't know if they still do. Wrestling will know. Are they still meeting on the third Thursday? They are.
Right.
Okay, well, I'll certainly ask Amherst for February 7th. Watertown said yes for January 24th. By Zoom, at this point, coming in at 7:15, I wanted to give us
Okay.
a few minutes to kind of organize and
So,
get in our
say that
seats.
again, I didn't understand. So Watertown may be available
He has said he would be available on the 24th,
on the 24th?
yeah.
Okay, good.
But I haven't got anybody on the 3rd, because at least so far, the ones I've
Right.
talked to
Okay,
have conflicts.
all right,
And I'll keep
I'm
on working
actually
on it,
gonna-
and I'll let you know as soon as I hear from Barnstable.
right. I'm planning to be away the middle part of January, so I was trying to see how we can work that, but if they can make it either on the 7th of February, that would work. or the 14th of February. But I think we should get them all done by then. I've talked to the person from Brookline who's a long-term moderator and is very familiar with the Brookline Town Meeting, and he's coming on either January 3rd or the 24th. We're going to also invite Mark Sylvia, former town manager, who's a town of, is it Fairhaven? And he's willing to come. So I think we've already got enough representatives from these different forms of government. Now we're going to get a good cross-section. So on Zoom, Paul, did you want to add a comment?
I did. I wanted to make something perfectly clear that the steering committees are an integral part of the planning board. And we require that anyone building a large project in any of the areas of the steering committees, that they go before the steering committee and write a report back to the planning board. We also, every steering committee has its liaison. I am the liaison to the Cedarville Steering Committee and attend all of their meetings. Beside that, I wanted to, and I hate to throw anything on anyone, but I knew someone who was the head of DPW, and when he was looking for a road to be paved, he would say to the contractor, here's what I'll give you, I want a Christmas bonus from you. So it's a very, very powerful position in the town. That's why I believe we need someone to be watching all these important positions. I would like to see a strong town manager. Thank you very much.
Paul, just if you give me that last sentence one more time, I just want to be sure I heard it.
I firmly believe that we need a strong town manager to watch over all
Right.
of these
Okay, got it.
in the town.
Thank you. So, Mr. Zuckerman, is he on Zoom? Oh, yeah, Anatol, go ahead.
Okay, this is my second comment at your commission, and I'd like to talk about the master plan, which is required by the state law. 5 Plymouth citizens, including myself. Well, first of all, in June of this year's Plymouth Planning Board decided to create a steering committee to work on a new master plan, which is required by the state law. 5 Plymouth citizens, including myself, volunteered to serve on that committee, but no communications were issued by planning board ever since. Instead, the planning department asked a member of the planning board, Frank Mand, to compile a list of the community recommendations for potential developers. This initiative may be instrumental in assessing developers' opinion, but it does not oblige them to implement those recommendations. I don't know what happened to that list, but I wrote my own recommendations to a Plymouth Planning Board for the new Plymouth Master Plan first. Since 2004, the town of Plymouth collected 7 various master plans and many planning studies that were not implemented. I hope that the planning board and the select board will use the new master plan practically if and when it is approved. Second, the planning board should reduce the construction of single-family housing and increase the construction of multifamily buildings, because the latter provides smaller physical and carbon footprints while creating more economic revenues than the former. 3, to achieve this goal, the zoning bylaws of Plymouth should increase the building height from the current 3 to 4 stories in village centers, because the 4-story construction provides lesser cost of construction per square foot while creating more usable space and greater energy efficiency than the other types of construction. At the same time, the zoning should reduce the footprint of the structures and increase the open space requirement. 4, the planning board should promote affordable housing to achieve the mandatory 100% of affordable housing units in order to avoid the invasion of 40B projects that don't provide true housing affordability in Plymouth. 5, to achieve this goal, the zoning bylaws of Plymouth should require developers to include 25% of affordable units per project without limiting their maximum profit of 20%, which is required by the 40B state law. For this purpose, the zoning should create a chapter called Plymouth Affordable Housing Plan. 6, I recommend that the Plymouth community input into the new master plan be expressed by specific proposals from all interested parties, published and discussed publicly. 7, the new master plan should establish the environmental standards that are more comprehensive than the recently adopted stretch code. Specifically, the plan should include the protection of existing aquifers and ponds and the structural reinforcement of Plymouth flood zones. And final, 8, the new master plan should follow the regulations of Massachusetts smart growth. I'm especially concerned with the lack of housing affordable by Plymouth working families. According to the town's authorities, 55% of Plymouth population cannot afford a house, a condominium here. Yet the town owns about 1,800 land lots, most of which are vacant. If these lots are used to build housing, the cost of construction can be reduced by 20%. And the town, as the owner of that land, will have more control over developers. This is just one of the practical aspects of the new master plan.
Could kindly bring your comments to a close. I hear what you're saying. These sound like excellent thoughts for the master plan committee to take under, to go into their thinking, and it's going to be a public process. I'm sure there will be hearings, the public will be heard from as the master plan is developed by the master planning committee, and you've got certainly some good ideas there, some good grist for them to consider. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Zuckerman? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your public comment. Just to...
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple things as we bring our meeting tonight towards a close. So we're going to have these 2 meetings in January, and there are 2 meetings, actually 3 meetings scheduled in February, the 7th, the 14th, and the 28th. And as we get through February, and after we've listened to all these invitees from the other towns, we need to get down to business, and I think we have to begin to consider the preparation of the charter, and we need to interview commission counsel as to who's going to help us start the drafting. But as I see the timeline, this is all going to take place in February, because by March, we're going to have to really start working on an outline and do some serious drafting. If we're going to be finished over the next 3 or 4 months after that, we have to have a preliminary draft ready by September. So that is the timeline. Does anybody have any thoughts or discussion? Okay. Thank you. So the next item is the minutes of November 15th, which Michelle very nicely sent to us. And by the way, just for the public, these minutes are really quite incredible. They're very detailed. They're very accurate. If you want to know exactly what we've been thinking about and contemplating and everything, it's in the minutes. I really recommend that everybody should read the minutes. They're not a cursory scant, just hitting the highlights. These are very detailed. And I think they're going to be a tremendous help to us as we go forward. Thank you, Michelle.
Move the
Any
minutes.
comments on the minutes? Yes.
I'll move them.
That's
Yes.
David moved them, is there a second?
Okay, I'll second, and then I
Okay,
do have a
discussion?
comment. I believe that there was a Susan Reddy, who was our last public speaker on the 15th. She
Yes,
talked,
I think she's not mentioned there.
and I don't see her mentioned, so I think it's just something Michelle will want to add to the minutes before we vote on it. I reviewed the November 15th meeting online, on the TV tonight, because I thought Ms. Reddy had some interesting, very interesting comments. And so I remember one of them was that she outlined 4 things that,
I thought I remember reading it, isn't it?
oh, page 9? Okay, thank you.
Betsy, look at page 9 of the minutes at the bottom.
Page
It
9.
says Susan Reddy via Zoom, and then she starts there and goes over to the next page.
My minutes from November 15th don't have numbers.
Pages 9 and 10. November 15th.
Oh, I see,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
It's at the top right,
Yeah,
okay.
I see her at the bottom of,
Oh, okay,
page.
I missed it at the bottom,
Yeah,
thank
and
you.
all the next page
Um,
is what she said.
That's great job. Thank you, Michelle, I did miss it. So,
Okay,
so-
David?
so-
just a very
so good.
minor sort of format thing. Sometimes it's our names, Bill Abbott, David Peck, sometimes it's Mr. Peck and Ms. Hall. So just, do one or the other, and I like having the first names, last name, but it's
Right.
kind of like, it just sticks out occasionally when David, Mr., David, so it's,
Right.
and it's some of the others too. But
We
the
got 2
content's
Davids and 2
perfect.
Bills. We got, it's a little tricky.
No, then Bill Abbott, Bill Cohen, but so,
Right.
but they're terrific minutes, but it's just that minor.
Okay. So, there's a motion to approve the minutes of November 15th.
I'll make that motion.
Oh, we have the motion. Yeah, we just
All
got
in
to,
favor of the approval? I have to do a roll call, unfortunately. Wrestling? Wrestling Brewster in favor of the minutes?
Yes.
Approval, yes. Okay, David Peck.
Yes.
Yes. Betsy?
yes.
David Malaguti?
Yes.
Larry Pizer?
Yes?
Bill Cohan?
Yes.
Frank Mann? Scott Becky?
Yes.
The reason we're doing this, it's in the statute that, on these Zoom calls, that if there's any member on Zoom, we have to do a roll call vote if it's taken. Okay, any old business? Any new business?
So, Bill, are you going to have it on the agenda for our next meeting, a discussion of the tract?
Right.
That'll be on that. So you
Yes,
want
well,
us to,
I said
our
that-
homework is to look over this before the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the
Well-
next meeting, if you bring them with you with your initials, then we'll start to work on them.
Okay, thank you.
If you initial the ones you're in favor of.
Okay.
Any new business? Then we'll see you on December 13th, and thank you very much for coming. This motion is in order to adjourn? We are adjourned. Thank you.